Glad to see everybody this morning. I can't see all faces here, but in any case, we are here. We'll just pick up from where we left off last time. We were discussing the first level of understanding, or perhaps I shouldn't call it the first level, because that will mislead you. But certainly it is a critical insight that we have to have if we are going to seriously pursue a course in deep wisdom. After all, we all are in search of some kind of knowing, some kind of knowledge, some kind of wisdom that ultimately will confer upon us the benefits of a satisfying life. And so in some sense then, we cannot really avoid moving deeper and deeper into the subject from last week, which was on the ending of suffering, knowing the causes and the ending of suffering. And this investigation into the nature of your suffering, when done correctly, is what produces a supreme understanding. And it is this supreme understanding then that helps guides us toward the ending of suffering. So I thought today that we will continue that discussion. But before we do that, were there any questions from last week? Was everything from last week fully processed and understood? All right, then if there was no questions left over from last week, and if all of that was understood, then we will continue our discussion on the nature of this suffering. The problem, as we discovered last week, was a thing called ego. Ego is the foundation and the basis of all of our suffering. But what exactly is this thing called ego? Have you ever thought about it? What is ego? How do we normally define ego? All at once. What is this ego? If the ego is the foundation and the basis of all our problems, according to these mystics, then it would warrant our deep investigation into the nature of ego. So we have to now turn our attention to ego, because ego, of course, is the only obstacle between us and the experience of happiness. And remember, we've already established the fact that all beings, from the amoeba to the angel, which includes human beings, is in search fundamentally of the experience of happiness. Fundamentally. We're all seeking a state of permanent relief from suffering. We're always, at all times, trying to do those things that will result in our feeling better, feeling good. And we're trying to somehow manipulate circumstances and situations in our lives in such a way that we're able to achieve a permanent state where we are feeling good. All of our actions, all of our activities arises out of that one fundamental motive, the avoidance of suffering, to find some way to relieve our suffering. And when you look very closely at your life, what you will find is that there's always, at all times, this undercurrent of misery that is moving underneath your life. Maharaji used to always say that every living being in this creation is in this state of misery. He says that either they are uncomfortably miserable or they're comfortably miserable, but they're miserable. That is never disputed. When one is in an uncomfortable state of misery, that is manifest in the form of being dysfunctional. Now you cannot function. Sometimes the misery becomes so much that you simply cannot function. It is too much. It creates a great deal of inertia. It immobilizes. Or you are functionally miserable. You can get up, you can go to work, you can interact with people, you can do your jobs, raise your children, interact with your wives and your husbands. But you're still fundamentally miserable, but you're functionally miserable. And of course, this is the great dilemma in our life, isn't it? How to come out of this perpetual state of misery. And one of the problems is that we don't know the cause of this misery. Therefore, we do not know how to give ourselves relief from the misery. And to make our problem even more compound, to increase our situation's dilemma even more so, is the fact that we are also in the process of dying. So here we are confronted with these two things, aren't we? On the one hand, we're living in a state of misery, unconsciously, some of us consciously, struggling, trying to find ways to relieve that misery. And on the other hand, death is pursuing us, and we're running out of time. And that also creates a kind of misery and a kind of suffering. So we have a problem on here. And essentially, we can reduce all of our activities to this fundamental goal of trying to somehow find some form of permanent relief from suffering. And now you need to look at your strategies that you have adopted. Because each and every one of us have adopted a certain strategy. And we've been experimenting with this strategy and so many other strategies all of our lives. Haven't we? Some of us, our strategy is to collect a lot of knowledge because we feel that if I get a lot of knowledge, that will somehow, some shape, form, or fashion, relieve my suffering. Some say, well, I'll collect a lot of money, believing that if I can just get enough money, then I will therefore be able to relieve my suffering. Some will pursue relationships. If I can just find the right woman or the right man, then I will be able to achieve this permanent relief from my misery and my suffering. And so forth and so on. And what the mystics say that becomes necessary at some point in time before you die is that you must pause and you must look clearly into your strategies and to really see to what extent your strategies. And remember, there have been thousands of strategies that you have used to look and see to what extent those strategies have been successful. This becomes the first task. We must go and investigate our own lives. We must begin to examine our own lives along this particular line, because that's the bottom line. The bottom line is that we're trying to achieve this state called happiness. And we will pursue anything. We'll pursue religion. Again, we're pursuing religion for the express purpose of finding some relief from this perpetual state of misery. So there is no activity that you engage in, however mediocre, however minuscule, that is not ultimately related to this one fundamental urge in us, this striving to find some relief from our suffering. And this is the whole key then to life. This is the bottom line to everything. Bottom line is the event, is the activity producing happiness. That's the bottom line. That's the bottom line. And so today we want to go now to the bottom line. We want to start looking at this thing. And as we do this, reflect in your mind, try to become conscious of your strategies. What is your strategies? What have been your strategies that you've been following? Look into them. The problem with a lot of the initial introspection we have to do on this level in order to obtain this kind of wisdom is to break through our denial. Those of you who've gone through the English classes, you understand the role that denial plays and our mismanagement of anger. Well, in the same sense, you see, we're in a great denial about our suffering. Our ego mythology very often gets in the way of us penetrating and seeing the reality of our suffering. Because after all, you got too many degrees to be in this kind of suffering. You got too much stuff. How can you be suffering? You cannot admit that to yourself. I got all of this knowledge. I've read all of these books. I've attended all these universities. I've been on this planet all these years. And for you to admit that you are suffering from this primordial ignorance, this fundamental unknowing that is the result of your continuous failure to achieve happiness, is too much for your ego to bear. But it must be looked at. And it must be looked at now. Because you don't know how much more time you have. So let's begin to explore this. What are some of the many ways that we can see how we all go about trying to find relief from this fundamental mystery? What are some of the things we do? What are some of the things you have observed other people doing? Maybe it's not far enough along yet, because I know you guys don't do this, but what have you been seeing other people do? Yes, sister.
Bhagwan, when you speak of misery, what exactly do you mean? I don't have to understand it. Are you saying it is something that you're trying to get away from? Something that's bothering you?
Yes. Misery is a feeling that we have that is best illustrated by words like tension, a lot of tension, a lot of strain, a great discomfort, dissatisfaction, some agony up there, something missing. It's a kind of a hankering going on inside of us. We're trying to find something else to appease, to produce peace. We're not at peace yet. We're not at rest yet. Something is still moving us, making us strive for more and more and more. We have not yet come into a state of rest. Our lives are very uncomfortable. There is something that is uncomfortable in our life that we're trying to remove, etc., etc. And what the mystics are saying, Sister Rose, is that this feeling of discomfort, this feeling of deep dissatisfaction, this absence of peace, this absence of joy, this absence of happiness, this thing called suffering, is what is motivating all of our behavior. And that we all have adopted and created certain strategies. Some of us have created lifetime strategies, you see, for the express purpose of finding some relief from this suffering. And we're trying to create circumstances in the world through people and things that ultimately will permanently eliminate this experience of suffering. And what the mystics are saying, Sister Rose, is that this fundamental attempt to relieve suffering through the manipulation and the arrangement of worldly situations and circumstances will always fail. Will always fail, with no exception, to enable you to experience the happiness that you're in search of. In fact, they go further and say that it is this very seeking that is the problem. But before we explore that, let us return to an initial exercise and just looking at the variety of strategies that we can see that people are engaged in with the express purpose, whether consciously or unconsciously, of alleviating their suffering.
So does that mean because I'm not really crazy about my job?
Well, we can take something as mundane as that, yes. Because very often careers and life and jobs are sometimes big components in our strategies for the relief of suffering. We say, well, if I can get me the right job, because I got a job I don't like. I got a job that is just giving me the blues. It just creating hell in my life. It is creating a great deal of discomfort, right? I am dissatisfied. It is not right. You see, I'm not at peace with it, so forth, so on. And then immediately the mind concocts a strategy that, well, Let me start preparing myself. Let me do something to find me a better job, right? And a job that I will feel good about. And then it begins that pursuit. You see? It begins that pursuit. It could be a job. It could be a woman, a man. There's so many things. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to now focus in on the ordinary things that we all are doing, feeling that by doing these things, that the result will be the attainment of some permanent state where we will feel good forever. Fundamentally, that's what you're trying to do.
So happiness is possible.
Well, it is possible, yes, but impossible if we pursue a certain strategy. And that is what the mystics' whole teachings are about. But again, let's look at this pursuit of this elusive state where we are feeling good forever. What are the strategies that you see? What are your strategies? What are your strategies? I don't mean to pick on you. There's nothing to be ashamed of, brother. We all in the same boat.
I know that.
Yes.
We can answer that right now.
I see.
I really have to think about it.
You have to think about it. Yes, you do.
Education, attaching ourselves to people and things.
But you have to really find, the first thing you got to do, you got to find out what's your strategies. Yes, Patricia?
Part of my strategy is to become aware of myself.
All right.
Because oftentimes I come to the conclusion that my makeup is living up to everybody else's expectations as to what I should be or should do or how I am.
Yes.
So now I'm going through a strategy of finding out what do I like, how does it make me feel,
Yes.
where is it going to take me, and where does my true peace and happiness lie.
Yes.
And I'm attaching myself from everything and everybody in order to find that out.
Of course. And that's a strategy. You see? That's a strategy. We all have a strategy. You have to know your strategy. Now, the reality is that most of us, unfortunately, is so unconscious of what's going on. We are so caught up, we never have been able to even pause long enough to really see what it is that we're doing. If you can pause for a moment and really look at your life, what you will see at all times, all that you are doing is implementing all kinds of different strategies and combinations of strategies with one express purpose: to relieve your misery. And you have got to see that. You have got to see that. That is the first step in the attaining of some wisdom. Because as long as you're caught up in that, you have no time to examine your life. And before you know it, it's gone. And you have never at no point during that lifetime achieved anything of a permanent nature. So that's a strategy. That's your strategy, or part of your strategy. And as you begin to look closely into it, you'll find that that strategy is connected with a lot of many strategies and supporting casts and things of that nature. But the ideal is to look at your strategies. Look into your strategies and see. Until you are able to see your strategies, it is very difficult for you to understand teachings. It is very difficult for you to understand what the masters and the gurus and saints and sages are even talking about. In fact, you can't even relate to what they're talking about at all, because you're so unconscious, you don't even know you're miserable. You have suppressed and went into such a deep state of denial. You see, you don't know what's going on, so you cannot respond to their wisdom teachings at all, because you feel that I don't need a Buddha for what? I'm all right. I don't need a master or guru. You're into self-guruing. You're your own guru. You understand? You for the life of you cannot see why anybody would have went to the feet of a Buddha or a Jesus. I mean, you see no necessity for that. You have your own intelligence. Right? But what is obscuring your view of the immense value of these Buddhas and the wisdom teachings that they give and share with us. But obscuring that is you cannot see your own activity that is producing your misery. One of the most radical statements that we made in the anger shop, too, was that everybody causes themselves to be angry. Is that about right? And something like that is also true of suffering. Suffering is not something that is inherently existing in the world. Please make a note of that. It's not like the world is the cause of your suffering. The suffering is out there somewhere and you catch it like a virus or a bacteria. No, it's not like that. Your suffering is your own creation. It is an activity that you are doing to yourself. Now requires you to really understand this, because unless you can at least come to this level of understanding, then it becomes very difficult for you to move further into a course of wisdom. Very difficult. So we begin by examining your strategies, your personal strategies that you have adopted, that are aimed at finding some solution to the problem of misery in your life. Now the mystics say that this misery is the result of our ego. The ego is that magnet, if you will, that all misery that we are experiencing is attached to. But then what is ego? Now, the Master says that the ego is not an entity. The ego is an activity. Ego is an activity. You have to enjoy that distinction. Ego is a kind of thing that you are doing. And what is the nature of that activity that you are doing that the mystic calls ego in? That activity is essentially the activity of trying to find happiness through the combination of worldly things and people. That is what is meant by ego. And when they say you have to drop your ego, they mean you have to drop this whole activity, this whole striving that you are undergoing, with all these strategies attached to that, with the aim and objective of attaining happiness in the world. This is the fundamental activity that is the result of your suffering. And hopefully today we'll begin to try to open that insight up so that we all can benefit from it. I'm simply setting it up for us now to begin to train our intellects onto it. So this ego is an activity, but it is an activity that is rooted in something even more fundamental. This activity that we call ego is rooted in a feeling that we have of being separate and individuated from that which exists. Fundamentally. When you look at it, you see, all of your activity, you are trying to get happy. All of that is about you, isn't it? It's just you. It's your individual thing. It's your own thing, isn't it? Right? And it's interesting, when you go into a madhouse, have anybody ever been in a mental institution, seen the inside workings of a mental institution? If not, I suggest that it won't be much different from what's going on here. But, but let me tell you something that will strike you instantly. When you see people who are crazy, according to the clinicians, right, who have serious mental disorder, what you'll find is that they all are very autistic in the sense that they all are closed up in themselves. So while you sitting here talking in the madhouse, somebody will be back there bouncing off the wall, somebody will be blowing snot and throwing it somewhere, they'll be running off. They won't be paying you any attention at all. They will be totally caught up in their own little drama. Now, in many respects, that's exactly our state, isn't it? You're caught up in your own little drama. You are not relating or connecting to nobody around you. Please make a note of that. Yes, you're in the house with these people. Yes, you're married to these people, but there's no connection. You're not relating to them at all. You're caught up in your drama, doing your thing. They're caught up in their drama, doing their thing. You understand? And the result is madness. How can it be anything else? So this feeling of separateness, this feeling of individuation, right, is the fundamental basis from which this ego activity arises. It is your attempt to find happiness just for yourself. And that's really what you're about. Bottom line. You're trying to find happiness just for yourself. Yes, sir? Right. Well, you know that. But even if you could, you wouldn't. That's the point. Even if you could make somebody else happy. Because you could do some things now that will alleviate the suffering of other people. Right? You don't have to wait until you get a millionaire and become that imaginary philanthropist that you said you would be. You don't have to wait for that. You could take 10 of your $20 now and alleviate somebody's suffering, but you don't do that. You could take an hour out of your day and go to the hospital and spend some time with someone. I mean, so at any moment, at any time, you can interrupt this ego activity of yours and really relate to the rest of humanity and to the rest of the world. But one of the characteristics then of our ego is that it causes us to be incapable of relating. In fact, we avoid relationships. Now, this is profound.
Well, I was going to say this. When you relate misery to anger, then you know that when we went through the workshop with anger and we fully understood that we were out of control in an anger situation, to me it's the same when you get a glimpse that you are in fact miserable, you become ashamed. And then you mismanage out of that.
That's right.
You cover yourself back up.
You contract.
Yeah,
You
contract.
recoil.
And we mismanage it. We
And
don't
we
know what to
mismanage
do.
it. I like your terminology, though. It is the mismanagement of the we mismanage it. Right? We mismanage it every time. We react.
Yeah.
Right? Out of this misery. Has nothing to do with, no intelligence is involved at all. Have you ever noticed it? Whenever you react out of misery, and you do react out of misery, that's all you're doing. There's nothing more than reacting out of misery. It does not ever involve the healthy use of your intelligence at all. When you're reacting out of misery, your whole ambition is to exploit. It is to take something from the other in order to anesthetize your misery. You become a taker. You're looking for who you can take something from to alleviate your misery. It is really pathological in the deepest sense of the word. So we have to really begin to look into this thing. But the first thing we have to do is come up out of this denial, at least to recover enough self-awareness to really see what's going on. To be able to bring into the view of your consciousness now the motivation that is behind all of your activities. There is something that is motivating your activities. Would you grant me that? Right? What is it? You've been thinking, oh, Bhagwan is my intelligence. No, it's not your intelligence. You've been thinking, oh, Bhagwan, well, my actions are connected with my understanding of life. No, it's not connected at all with your understanding. What is the root and basis of all of your actions? You must see this because you have to see this. You see, no one can see this for you. You have to see this. And you have to see it not just one time, you have to see it moment by moment by moment by moment by moment. Because throughout the course of a day, you are engaging in thousands and thousands of actions, both at the level of body, speech, and mind. And all of these activities at the level of body, speech, and mind are all rooted in this fundamental drive to mitigate and alleviate your suffering. And what is worse, you need to see how you have failed. Not only see the activity of your ego, see the strategies that you have concocted, you must also see how they have failed up to this very moment. Seeing that will shift your whole response. Seeing that will move you into a whole different state of mind. But you must see it. You see. You must see it. So this feeling, this fundamental feeling of being separated, recoiled, as you say, contracted, individuated, disconnected from all other human beings in the whole universe. Have you noticed how disconnected you feel? Very disconnected. Very isolated. That is the feeling of separateness. Now the problem, of course, is that we have misidentified ourselves with this separateness. We think that's who we are, and we are clinging to it. We're trying to stay as separate, as isolated, as contracted, as individuated as possible. Now this is madness, isn't it? But look at it. Isn't this what we're doing? We're making every effort we can to keep that fist of our being balled up tight. We try to do everything that we can to remain disconnected from all other human beings. We're trying to do everything to have our life that is not touched by anything. Now look at this. You're trying to create a life that is not touched by the rest of existence. You think you got a good chance of pulling that off? Huh? You want to create a life that is not impacted by weather, not impacted by other people, not impacted by nothing. I submit, you're going to be in a lot of trouble, a lot of pain. Because there is no life that you can create that is not impacted by the whole, by definition. And so the Master said the first thing that we have to do then on an authentic path of spiritual search is that we have to deal with this ego and this ego activity that is arising from this feeling of separation. Now, we said already that the foundation, the origin, the ground out of which this suffering emerges is in this feeling of separation, this ego state that is generating an activity. And the mystics say that the activity is just like if I was sitting here pinching myself. Now I'm inducing my own pain here, but I can't see what I'm doing. I'm unconscious. I'm conscious that I'm in pain. I'm conscious that I'm in misery. I'm conscious that I'm suffering, but I'm unaware of the cause of my suffering. I have not penetrated that deep into my life. I don't know why the hell I feel so bad. All I know, I feel bad. I don't know why I don't feel good. I just know I don't feel good. I've not gone deep, right? So at this surface level now, I react to this pain in me. So I run here and I get me aspirin and I take, right? And for just about 2 or 3 seconds, I don't feel the pinching, but it wears off and the pain of the pinching is back again. I run and get married, get me a wife and thinking that that'll stop it. I get me a husband thinking that'll stop it. I get me a wife, I get me a job, I get me a car, I read me some holy books, I join the church, I go get a, follow this and follow that. And I'm doing all of this stuff, right? And yet the pain continues because I'm not seen the real cause of my suffering. It is my own pinching of myself. Is that right? This activity that we call egoing is your pinching yourself. What is it? It is the presumption of your separateness from the whole. It is the presumption that you are unhappy. That is also a presumption that you have made. It is the loss of your awareness of your fundamental oneness with the whole that by definition is a state of bliss. Your nature is bliss. We're like that placid pond of water, just cool, calm. And it is your activity that is disturbing your calmness of your existence. Try to understand this. It is your ego activity that is disrupting the peace of your own pure existence. It is if your consciousness is being disturbed by all of these ambitions that you're throwing into. And that disturbance of your consciousness with all of these ambitions is what we experience on the level of wisdom. That is the heart of the teachings of all mystics and saints and sages, irregardless of time, place, and culture. One of the great mystics, Jesus, says that when you understand this thing here, he says, then what you will have to find out is how to transcend the ego. Jesus says, take no thought of yourself. Take no thought for what you should eat or wear. At all. Again, you can hear in his teachings, as you will hear in the teachings of all those who have realized, is this whole emphasis on the transcending of this ego. Is this fairly clear? Because I will back up and try to make it more fundamental if I need to break it down. It is too important of an insight to let evaporate into terminology. You know, so I want to make sure that you get what I'm saying here, because it's the key. Yes, Patricia?
You said take no thought in what you eat or wear, and that the ego is caught up in worldly existence. But how can you not, how can you remove that from you when you have to be aware of how you're going to eat, sleep, how you're going to get around,
Yes.
how you're going to survive out there? So how can you separate that from
Yes.
day to day?
Yes, yes. What the master says is that we have to go through a lot of activities in life. But the key is that to go through these activities without the expectation that they will make it. Drop that expectation.
That they're going to make you happy. So you go through the motions that I'm going to go to this job because it pays the bill. Not because it makes me happy.
Absolutely.
Or because it's going to make me better as a person. Or it's going to do anything other than generate these funds to pay the bills so I can have a place to sleep. Okay.
That is all. And that's one of our biggest problems, you see, is that we are dysfunctional in some of the key areas, these very fundamental areas. Money, livelihood, sex, food, all of these areas, the ego distorts, and we enter into them in a very non-functional way. So even when we eat now, we got greater expectations from the food than what the food can really do. All the food can do is energize this body. But we use the food now as some kind of ultimate solution. We make it a part of our strategy for happiness, and then we always get out of the appropriate relationship with the food. Is that about right? We do the same thing with sex. You see what I'm saying? And so forth and on. We do the same thing with money. We do the same thing with energy. You look across that board, right? We take them out of their natural arena. So we're going to go into that a little bit more, I think, because that's where we have to do some work. It is a profound subject, and I know that if you've not heard these kind of things before, that it takes a while for this to kind of sink in. Because I know that nobody wants to believe that you are creating your own suffering. I know that's the hardest part. You think that you are being a victim. You think somebody has done this to you. You think that this is coming from the outside of yourself. I know you do. You really, really do. You see? Yet this is a wrong view. And as long as you have that wrong view, you're going to keep spending all your energy out there trying to manipulate things, right? And you will never get any relief. And that is what your experience has been. You still don't have no relief. You see? You still don't have any relief. You're still in misery. In spite of everything that you done did, you're still in this fundamental state of misery. And the mystics is trying to convince you that you will not be able to solve that problem. The problem is your own ego. And until you are able to transcend this ego, then you will necessarily have to experience misery. All right, now with that said, let's open it up and let's see what you don't have yet before just piling stuff on you. Let's make sure first that you got what it is that I've discussed thus far.
Bhagwan,
Yes,
I want to
sister.
piggyback on sister
Yes,
what
yes,
you
yes.
were saying. If I'm understanding you correctly, you're saying that because we're in the world, we can enjoy some of the things that it has, with the understanding that it still does not bring happiness. There's nothing wrong with wanting a nice car, a nice house, some money.
You already answered your question. So you got it. You answered it already.
Okay. But what I understand is this is not happening. This music can bring you some joy.
What it will temporarily relieve you from your misery.
Yeah.
And that's the hardest thing to really see. It's really kind of hard to see that everything that you are doing as an attempt to give yourself some relief. And most of the relief is temporary, as June pointed out, from this fundamental state of misery. And that you have to go on every day adding more and more to your strategy. You're like a junkie. I call it the junkie mindset. And just like a junkie, when they shoot that dope, you see, and they get high, but they got to shoot more dope. You see, they never attain, and they got to keep striving to get that high. You see, over and over again. It is the junkie mindset. That's what we all have. That's why we become junkies and alcoholics. Because we have that fundamental mindset to start with.
So, when do you reach the state of happiness then?
When you drop all activity. Because it is the activity that is interfering with the already existence of happiness. It is almost like this, Sister Rose. That for instance, when we say, for instance, that God is happiness, God is bliss, and all those other things, right? That's one of the motives that we have for seeking God, right? That by becoming in union with God, that we will come back into this state of infinite bliss, infinite rest, infinite peace. And that motivates us to go to church, to take yoga, and all these other things, right? Because that's our fundamental belief. And if that is the case, what we have to understand that you are already in God. There has never been a time when you are not existing in God. It is not possible to exist outside of God. It is not like you are here and God there, and now you travel through some empty space to get contacted with God. That is not how it is. There is only God, wherever you are at any given time. And that you are already in God. That is already the case that you are in union with the divine. The problem is that you're not aware of it. And because you're not aware of it, you are not having the experience of that inherent bliss that is God. And the thing that is interfering with your coming into awareness of your oneness with God is your clinging to your ego. You understand? The confining of all your attention on yourself. You have put all your attention on yourself. Have you noticed that? All of your attention is fundamentally engaged in this activity of executing your strategy. All of it. So much so that you're not attentive to God. You're not even aware that there is a God. How can you be? You have no attention available for it. You see the dilemma? Your ego and the gravity of it has sucked up all of the attention that you got. And all of your attention is rooted and your little drama, your little efforts to attain some permanent relief from your suffering. And you must therefore transcend this ego activity. That is, you must actually free up the attention that you have confined just to yourself. Do you understand me? If you are just paying nothing but attention to yourself, when you go out this door, if all your attention is just focused in on your body, now you're going to walk out of traffic and get killed somewhere. You understand? Right? I want you to understand all your attention is on you. All of it. And so this re-experience of our already union with God is simply a matter of the release of attention from the ego knot. All our attention is knotted up in the ego. And we have to untie that knot. And the attention automatically becomes aware of God. When you are no more, then your awareness of God is there. The problem is you, the ego. And that's the whole purpose of religion. It's the whole purpose of true, authentic spirituality. It's to how to transcend this contraction, as Emma called it, that we call ego. How to become liberated from this imaginary feeling of separation. And it is imaginary, isn't it? Because in reality, can you be separated from anything? No. And this is why death is such a terrifying event for you. Because this separation, this imaginary separation that you have identified yourself with, that you're calling me in contradistinction to him or her, that imaginary separateness that you are totally identified with is coming to an end. And that is called death. And that terrifies you. Because a time is coming when you will not have an opportunity to continually execute any of your strategies. You're running out of time. And the crisis is that and you still have not found it yet. And the clock is just going on. And soon you're going to be dead any minute now. And you still have not found any peace, joy, authentic happiness. That is serious to them. Serious to them. So, again, this whole problem becomes how to transcend this activity called ego and overcome this feeling called separateness or individuality. But the hardest thing to do is to change how we relate to this thing. Because here in the West, we celebrate this. In the West, we promote separateness. In the West, this is how we've been culturally conditioned. You know, we're very much into individualism, radical individualism that is not connected with anybody else. We have all bought into the myth that I can live my life without it being touched by anybody else. And then you are actually trying to do that. That is actually what everybody in this room is trying to do. You have concocted some little ideal of a life, and you're trying to play it out without it being interfered with by anything. And that is madness. That is not going to, has not worked already. And the amazing thing is that seeing that it has not worked, you continue doing the same thing. Now that's what's really amazing. Now you done seen every plan, every scheme that you have came up with has failed. It has not produced the coveted state. You don't have it yet. And seeing that, experiencing that, you still are able to turn around and sometimes do the same thing all over again with a new set of deception. And the reality you see, the master says is that for us who are caught up in this ego state, we can't get out of it. Hence the need for a master, hence the need for a teacher. Of our own, you cannot get out of your ego activity. It's impossible. you're caught up in it. No way to get out of it by yourself. So, yes, Sarah?
And this, unfortunately, even with the master, like coming here in once a week or whatever, and listening to you, that is not enough to combat 23 hours of the other stuff that's being bombarded with,
Yes,
you know?
yes.
And it's just overwhelming, you know?
Yes.
We just don't have the avenue
Yes,
to.
yes, yes. Sandra has, as usual, put the question in right perspective for all of us. That even once we become aware of this, what is the way out of this mess? You know, what is the way out of this mess? Because our ego habits are so powerful, right? That we just, this talk that we had, in 2 more hours, it'll be evaporated. It'll be gone. You won't even remember it. Or you might remember just a little bit of this, a little bit of that, but the gravity of your ego would take over again. You see? Or even coming here, Sandra, is a part of your ego strategy. You see? I'm going to come and I'm going to go and listen to somebody teach, some good preacher, some great teacher, and I'm going to, hear that and understand something, and then that's going to be able to catapult me into a state of relief. You see how we now reduce even the teachers to our ego strategies. It gets very profound. But there is a way out, and that is why you will find in all of the great traditions, by great tradition, I mean all of the great spiritual traditions that are in the world, right? Buddhism, Hinduism, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, all of the various yogas and other branches of mysticism. All of these great traditions, when you go very deep into them, when you can go into them at that point in time before they had become corrupted and co-opted by the priesthood and all this other stuff, if you could look at them when they were still pure, you will find that there have been one universal methodology that all founders of world religions and spiritual systems have advocated for the liberation of those of us who are trapped in these states of ego. And that has been what they have called Guru Bhakti Yoga. Now I have Sadarji's attention. He was back there sleeping all of this time. Now for the first time. Now he says, all right, now he's talking. Guru Bhakti Yoga. And because what we have to learn how to do, and there's a lot of yoga, and we have talked on that in many other workshops, and we will continue to talk on it. But the idea is that you have to find a way to not think about yourself. You have to find a way to forget yourself. By self, I mean this ego. The whole problem is that as long as you keep thinking about yourself, guess what's going to happen? Would anybody like to venture what the outcome of thinking about yourself will do?
Nothing.
Huh?
Nothing. You're going to fail.
Yeah, nothing but misery. Your misery is the outcome of thinking about yourself. And as long as you're thinking about me, I, what I want to do. Because look at it, what are you thinking about? Have you ever looked at the nature of your thinking? Have you ever examined it? What are you thinking about all the time? You're thinking all the time of what can happen, what needs to happen, what I can do in order to feel good, feel better, mitigate suffering, relieve misery. That's all you think about all day long. It's about right? No? Pat, you think about some other things. Good. Tell us.
Well, now that I've learned how to let go of other things, my focus is not always on that. Now I'm contemplating on finding that peace. And some of the ways I use to find peace is through prayer and study.
When you think, what are you thinking about?
All that?
Yes. And when you pray, what are you praying for?
When I pray, most of my prayers are about things that are beyond my control. And that's practically everything So
Give us an example.
my children.
Yes, I pray for the benefit and well-being of your children. Your children. Underline yours.
Oh, okay.
It's yours. It's always going to be me, mine, or something.
No, I do pray for others.
Yes.
It's not always
Yes, you
mine.
pray for
I
others
do pray for
so that they
others.
don't go crazy and do something to you. So even what you want for others ultimately is for you. Lord, pray that everybody in the world become peaceful so nobody can jack me up no more. You understand? Ultimately, it always comes back to you.
Bhagwan.
Yes, sister. You got me. You want to try?
Man, what is the concept with I am you and you are me?
For most of us, it's just talk, it's just philosophy. But in reality, that's what we have to get to. You see, we got to get to that point where we actually are able to experience that in reality.
So if I'm doing things for me, not with understanding that someone else is going to benefit, how then is that okay?
I see your question is that if you are acting strictly out of selfishness, right? And
No, not out of
or doing something for yourself.
doing something for
But that's
myself,
not-
but it's also going to benefit the whole.
But the thing that you construct to do for yourself, when you are considering that activity, right? You're considering it first as doing something that is good for you.
But it's something wrong with that.
No, what I'm saying is that the assumption that you're making is that because it's good for you, it's good for everybody else. And that's your assumption. You see my point?
But
now, what happens if it turns out that the thing that you truly can do that will be of maximum benefit for everybody else will run absolutely opposite of your own selfish interest? Then you do not do it. You see my point? We define good in relationship to us and how that appeases, satisfies, fit in with our strategy, our goal on a personal level. It's very selfish. You see my point?
So,
And the thing about this, sister, that I like your point for is this, is that every action that you commit has a ripple effect. Everything that you do definitely impacts upon everybody else. Now that is for sure. Right? And that should itself put a lot of stuff thought on our mind. You see, X you out, and the whole history of mankind since you've been on the planet will have to be off. That's how critical of a role we all are playing, because we are all interdependent. We have all each year watched A Wonderful Life. It's a warm, loving movie with Jim Stewart and all that. At least you watched it when you was a kid. Not since you got black. I'm talking about before you were black, all right? Before you were black, you was into that, right? You never missed it, not one Christmas, right? Now, what was interesting about the story is how the character was made to see the role that his life played in the intersecting with all other lives, you see? He was thinking that his life was meaningless, a failure, etc., etc. And then in the storyline, he was shown by the angel how if he was eliminated from existence, what would be the outcome in the lives of these other individuals. In some sense, it's a great insight, because that is exactly the case here with all of us. So you're right in some sense, Rose, that our actions definitely impact upon other people. And in understanding that, you see, even if you try to just keep your motive as good, you know, let's concede to that, right? If you can enter into your strategies with that large vision, right, of relationship, of relating to other people, taking that into consideration, factoring that into it, right? That I must not only do something good for myself, but now the other criteria that you see, it must be good for everybody. And the kind of categorical imperative, right? Only do that which is good for everybody, because I'm going to affect everybody, right? If you can discipline your actions like that, what we call common, you see, then perhaps there's a lot of weight to what you say. But usually that is not the case with most of us. Usually we never go that far. As I said before, most of us are so contracted, so turned into ourselves, right? So balled up that we can't even relate to other people. We're really not into relationships with other people. It's a misnomer. We're simply like individual mad people in the same room, each doing their own thing, fundamentally, closed into their own little individual worlds, not relating at all. In fact, not only are we not relating, we're trying to avoid relating. I know this sounds strange, but the whole ideal is that our motive is to avoid all relationships. We don't want to relate. I want to do my thing. I want to do that which I feel will produce a state of feeling good. And if by marrying you, that can be enhanced, then I marry you. Right? Has nothing to do with you. You are a component in my strategy. I'm marrying you because fundamentally my belief is that by marrying you, by mating up with you, that I'm going to be able to lead or better relieve or attain a higher state of relief from my fundamental suffering. You see? The suffering may be in the form of loneliness. Suffering comes in many flavors, right? It need not just always be material. Now, you're just lonely. And you're just so all alone. And this loneliness is just killing you. You got a good job, you got a nice car, a nice apartment, you see, a loving mother and father, right? And sisters and brothers, but you are alone. And this loneliness is killing you, you see. And so you may now, enter into a relationship with another human being to dilute your loneliness so that you can experience some relief from the suffering. You see my point? That's not authentic relationship. That's just more expression of your ego activity. That's all. That's strategy.
But is something wrong with that?
Is something wrong with it?
Yeah. If you're releasing or relieving yourself, using your
yes, you're masturbating, you're jacking off. And yes, there's something wrong because you reduce the other human being to just something to alleviate your tension.
So that relationship would have to be mutual. That person, the other person would want to have to be.
It should be a real relationship. Yeah, it should be a real relationship.
Okay.
You see my point?
The other side, you're just using somebody.
Right.
You don't care about them.
Right. And that defines most relationships.
Okay.
Right? Most relationships are like that. And it never gets beyond that. They never grow beyond that. Even if they stay together 50 years, it's just 50 years of mutual exploitation. That's all. But it's really no exchange of that energy. Why? Because in an authentic relationship, you see, when you really moved into that relationship, right? I used to always say that when you are in a deep relationship with another person, in a loving relationship, and that's the word that the saints have used. In fact, love is one of the yogas for the transcending of ego. Love is a yoga. It is the greatest yoga of all. There is no yoga higher than love. Absolutely not. It is the epitome. It is higher than mantra. It's higher than hatha yoga. It's higher than asanas and body posture. It's higher than renunciation. It's higher than everything. The yoga of love is a high practice. And in the yoga of love, the whole ideal is to transcend your ego, to forget about yourself in relationship with another human being. You see? That's the only way you can be happy in relationship with another human being, is to transcend your ego. This is a profound insight system. Try to have it. As long as you've not been able to transcend your ego in relationship to another human being, that relationship with that other human being will simply become another contributing factor in your misery. With no exception. Profound. So if we become yogis of love, what they call bhakti yoga, the yoga of loving, right? Using love as the means to transcend this sense of separation and otherness, right? Then all that you say can take place. Not just with your husband and wife, but with every human being that you come in contact with. You will become a great blessing, a tremendous blessing, a great peace. You will become almost elemental, like wind, rain, sunshine, a cool breeze on a hot day. You become a force field, an energy field, stepping into you dead flowers with you. You understand? Because this love is coming through. The ego is out of the way. When the ego gets out of the way, God, the energy that is God, just bursts. When your ego is removed, God can touch others through you. But as long as your ego is there, God can't reach nobody through you. You see? And so the net result is that you simply become a source of misery for other people. Now this is hard to believe. I know you've been thinking, and you have been thinking, that other people are making you miserable. But what you have to understand, you are the source of misery for the other. Underline that. But you can't believe it. Do you know how many people you have made miserable in your lifetime? Hundreds of them. Just absolutely. If you call them all in, we couldn't get them in this room. Right? We couldn't get them in Soldier Field, the number of people whom you have made miserable in the course of just this lifetime. Feelings you have hurt with reckless language, right? Bursts of anger, all kinds of things. So what you are saying, Rose, is a beautiful goal. But to get that, you must become a bhakti yogi. You must transcend yogi to get that. And that's what the teachings are all about. So Sandra's original question was about, well, what do we do with the rest of the time? You have to spend the rest of the time when you're away from here, not thinking about yourself in the form of Guru Bhakti Yoga or some of the other practices of Aspirant, Bhagwan, Dhyan that you did. But of all of the practices, of levels of practices, of Aspirant or Dhyan or Bhagwan, the supreme practice is Guru Bhakti. That is supreme. And that is fundamentally the holding of the form of the master in your visual eye to the exclusion of all things else. To take the tension that you have all contracted in your little eye activity that you've been running all day long, take that attention off of your eye activity and simply fill it with the form of the master. That is the highest, fastest, deepest practice that you can do. It's not so easy. It's not so easy. But it is by far the best practice. Yes, sister?
Are you talking about meditation?
Yeah, that is meditation. Yes. When yoga and meditation, I use these words kind of simultaneously. But meditation, Pat, is really the science of transcending ego activity. That's fundamentally what meditation is about. When we meditate, what we're doing, we're transcending in stages the components that make up the ego activity. Remember, the ego activity is made up of the actions with the body, the actions with speech, actions with mind. And what we do exactly in meditation is we shut down, we transcend this body consciousness so that we are thereby able to transcend the physical aspect of ego as it relates to the activity of the body. Then when we do that through asanas, posture, and then through the mantra, in the repetition of a mantra, we shut down the speech part so that all our attention is in the mantra. Our attention is not on ourselves. If your attention is in your mantra, it cannot be on the ego, the activity of the ego. You see, and therein lies the strain, right? And then, of course, with bhajan, which we call listening to the sound, you see, which ultimately takes your attention even off of the mind, right? So that's not a good rendition, but I'm just giving you a nutshell so that you can follow along with the discussion. So that is essentially what is meant by meditation. So that is classical yoga, you see. That is classical yoga. It involves hatha yoga, yoga of the body, jhana yoga, yoga of the mind, mantra yoga, etc., etc., etc. But the supreme yoga, the yoga of all yogas, the aim of all yogas, the guru of yogas is bhakti yoga, guru bhakti yoga. Because it is that yoga that enables you to transcend the ego activity of thinking exclusively about yourself. And it is a practice that you can do without sitting in a closet somewhere. All of the other kinds of meditation need special environments, right? Now, if you're going to go sit in your formal meditation like Sandra, you need to make sure nobody's around, the room is quiet, the lights is off, and we all know that, right? So there's only X amount of time you can spend in that kind of meditation, right? And as Sandra pointed out, well, I'm doing an hour, 2 hours of this, but the other 22 hours, I'm just back into that activity. And Sandra said, well, that's nuts, because how can 22 hours of ego activity be offset by 2 hours of trying to, it doesn't work that way. And you're right. That 22 hours when you're not in your formal meditation should be in Guru Bhakti. That's where the attention. And just like when you sit in meditation and your mind drifts out and you bring it back to the mantra, as we're moving through life throughout the day, when our attention is drifting off into all of this kind of repertoire that goes on in our mind, we need to bring our attention back to the root form. And with feeling attention, right? It can't be mechanical, it must be felt, right? And that becomes a way to distract the attention off of the ego activity. Because without distracting your attention off your ego activity, you simply reinforce the ego activity. You got my point? And by reinforcing the ego activity, you simply become more miserable. You just pinch yourself all the more. Because think about it. When you say that if I could have another job, how happy I will be. Instantly that set up tension in the body-mind. You go into a state of tension. You see? And you're in that state of tension until what? Until you can get the other job, right? When you get the other job, by achieving that, then you feel relief. But it only lasts about 4 days tops, right? Because now the mind will say, now I need to get a promotion at my new job. And again, the body-mind back in the tension. You see? And that's how it goes. Every time you set up a desire, it creates a tension and stress in the body-mind system until that desire is attained. And the moment that desire is attained, and when you discover that the attainment of that desire, the fulfillment of that desire, did not result in a permanent state of feeling good forever, and you will discover that, you immediately set out another desire, because you got a bunch of them. Right? And in this way, we go about living. This is essentially a snapshot of your life. This is your life. This is how you've been living. You've been trying all these strategies, and ain't none of this stuff work. And the master says, see in this, see this thing, and then do your devotion. Do your meditation. Come out of this. The moment you forget about self, you experience bliss. It is profound. The moment you forget, think about it, the most blissful time that you probably had was when you was a kid, where there was no thought about self. It was pre-ego, before your ego got into place. You were just happy as a lark. You understand? Hopefully, but it don't count. You're right, Pat, because it was unconsciousness, right? It was like the kind of bliss you have when you're in deep sleep without dreams, right? But we know that it was a time, somewhere back many, many years ago, when you didn't feel all this tension in your body-mind, right? Now the ideal is to be able to recover that same state with consciousness and awareness, full awareness. And the only way to do that is to drop this ego activity. And the only way to do that is to forget about yourself, to transcend yourself, to die while living. It's the words that the mystics use. You're going to die in any case. You see my point? this separate entity that you feel you are, this individuation that you feel you are, this clinging to this separate state that you feel you are, that is coming to an end. And it will be painful, because it will be the death of all of your ambitions, all of your strategy. Your strategy is coming to an end. There's going to be a time when you can't execute nothing. And then you're just going to be locked in this state of misery. Just locked. No way out. No insight, no attainment, no spiritual growth, no nothing. Just trapped in this state on your deathbed. It's this body, ego, mind, ego, just dissolve into nothing. It has risen out of nothing. It is going to dissolve right back into nothing. And it's going to be very painful, because it's going to feel like you died, because that is who you think you are. You are that for all practical purposes. And so the Master says, die while living. And how do you die while living? Through the yoga of love. Love yoga. In fact, the mystics go so far, they say, if you cannot do Guru Bhakti yoga, then just fall in love with another human being. I mean, this is profound. Because everybody won't have that good karma to have association with the Guru. You see my point? At least with the Guru, there's not going to be any exploiting. There's always that danger in other arenas. But if you can find another human being that you can practice the yoga of love with and transcend your ego, it will make you immensely. And the Master said, but if you cannot find another human being, then find some animal, some dog, a bird, a parakeet, find something. You know, but you must love something. Now, look at it. Our strategies are absolutely the reverse. Absolutely the reverse. We're not trying to transcend our sense of separate self. We're trying to reinforce the sense of separate self. Is that right? We're trying to build that up. And we're taking our people, we move into relationship with the express ambition of how to take this person, how to use this person, and masturbate myself with. Fundamental. And give myself a better feel. Fundamental. Fundamental. And the result is that it failed. It always failed. Seeing this through your devotion. All right. Is there anything else that you have enough today? I won't just hold you here and waste your time, right? But there's other things you need to do. We can do them. Any last questions you have? Anything said? I'll take the last word. If you don't want it, I'm giving you your chance. Yes?
I have a question about meditation.
Yes.
In order to, what is the best exercise you can use for meditation to clear your mind?
To clear your mind, the best, highest form is Guru Bhakti Yoga, as I said. But that is usually something that most of us have difficulty doing because of the impurity of our mind. And so we have to first undergo a kind of mental purification. And the best kinds of meditation for that is what we have called Silipship Yoga. And we can give you a better explanation of all of that. But certainly it begins at the level of the body, right? Involves diet, there's some things that you should do and should not do in relationship to your body, how you use it, in relationship to how you use your speech and how you use your mind. And so we want to first bring them into a certain order and to lay the foundation. And then on top of that foundation now, we begin to develop the practice, right? And so there's so many different yogas that you can read about, but a lot of those yogas were yoga that was have come down to us from very ancient time. And they're very difficult to do these days. You see, there are yoga systems, for instance, that require you to abandon the world and go up into a cave and live the life and renunciate. Well, very few of us are going to be able to benefit by that. There are certain yogas that require you to become celibate. You know, very few people are going to deal with that. There are some yogas that require you not to be a householder. You can't, you know, involve and get in relationship with other people. But the Suruchap yoga that we advocate here, at least, is a kind of yoga that is for the modern times and for modern folks, particularly those of us in the West and black people. Because black people need some powerful yoga, because we are all messed up. Slavery has retarded us so badly, psychologically, emotionally, and spiritually. And the amazing thing, we run around thinking that we're great spiritual people. We're not great spiritual people. We are people who have been psychologically damaged, believing in all kinds of nonsense, superstition. We are superstitious people. And superstitious is not to be confused with spiritual. And so, for us, a very radical yoga is required. And no people need a yoga of love more than us, because we're killing each other like madness, all in the name of this individual ego activity, you see? But now we think by killing this brother here, I'm going to enhance my sense of happiness. I mean, it's madness. So we've tried to design an approach to meditation that takes into consideration all of these new realities, you see, that did not exist thousands of years ago. And so I'll be more than happy, you know, you know how to get me. We go back far enough for you to know how to get your hands on me. And anytime you feel interested, or you call anybody here, and we make a vow to share with you whatever we do. Yes, Sister Rose, and then Brother Al.
That's what I was about to ask. So, do you have books on what I'm looking for? Books on knowledge of ancient ancestors, different systems.
There's there's not much, but there are some books out there. I mean, you have to go to a good bookstore, free found books, or more black bookstores now. But there are books like Matuna, for instance, where Shakem goes into some of that. You could pick up bits and pieces in classical Egyptology, the translation of Greek Steves and Virgil and all of that. There's biographies on a lot of the pharaohs in their tradition, both on Akhenaten, etc. But you will not find very much in writing on that system, simply because no one really knows how to interpret the hieroglyphs. You understand? The meaning that they are given to the hieroglyphs is conventional. It's guesswork. They really have no idea what the pyramid text is all about. So, because they do not have access to the meaning behind the hieroglyphs, they're not able to live out of that. And there's so much with this story. You must remember that when the Romans went through Egypt on their conquest, they just burnt everything. All of the scrolls and the papyruses. So that information in the written form, in the tradition of the ancient Egyptian, was just about destroyed. That was the whole intent, was to destroy all physical traces of the ancient system. Those that were not destroyed was when those systems branched out and as the people migrated. And some of the mystics, obviously, some of the priests, obviously, left Egypt and took the teachings with them. Much like some of the Jews, with the Roman invasion, took some of their scrolls and went into the caves of Qumran, etc., where we now found the Dead Sea Scroll or the Nag Hammadi scrolls, etc. So something like that rescuing of teachings occurred even in ancient times, and they went into different lands and reemerged under different names now. You see, much of what you will see in the Vedas or in the traditions of the Hindus or Buddhism, a lot of that you will find is the resurfacing of this ancient wisdom, et cetera, et cetera.
I'm interested in that history. I want to go back and read that history so I'll have some more knowledge of what I'm doing. Can you make up a list of some?
Bibliography, thing, civil law. He's an expert in this area.
Okay.
Okay. He'll help you much. Yes, brother.
I was going to say, what you had mentioned earlier about how we just retarded about our slavery experiments. I kind of agree with you on that. We just deny about our slavery experiences.
Yes.
Total denial.
Total denial.
Yeah, I most definitely for sure.
Total denial. As if it didn't do any damage to it.
Right.
You know.
How can you strip people of everything and let them go after 400 years and 100 years later you think that was then has no effect on us now?
Messed up.
Right.
Messed up. And you see it all throughout our community. We suffer from a complete absence of true spirituality in our community. There is no spirituality in our community at all. It is full of religious bullshit. And that is it. Really. And why? Think about it. You cannot have that many black people who profess to be Christians and have this level of crime and murder and mayhem. And certainly when you combine the number of black people who profess to be Muslims and Jews, no way possible. It is a crisis. And the very religious systems that have been instituted in the black community are of an inferior nature. They have been inferior from day one. They were designed to be inferior, made up of nothing but gobbledygook and fairy tales. That's what was fed. Do you understand, brother? They feeding you pig feet, hog maw, guts, garbage food, right? And then you think that now this is soul food and it's glorious. Just as they gave you the worst kind of food, they gave you the worst kind of spiritual system. They gave you spiritual system, religious teaching that help them further their own aims and objectives connected with white supremacy. They made you as religiously and spiritually retarded as possible. And we are still languishing in that retardation. And it is ugly, and it is offensive, and it is time for it to come to an end. It has done more damage to black people than any crack cocaine, any alcohol, any crime, anything. Because it has destroyed the soul of black people. It is very ugly. I know it's radical, very radical, you see. But there are a few black people that are waking up who have understood that, and who are no longer playing that game. They're through with that game of going to church to make myself feel better. That's over. You see what I'm saying? They're no longer a part of their strategies. They still may have strategy, but at least it's evolved. They've done that number, But it anesthetizes people. It puts people to sleep. It gives them false hope. And that's one of the things. All right, I think I've said enough to get me in trouble for today.